July 16, 1945, a remote desert in New Mexico. At 5:29 a.m., the world changed forever in a flash brighter than the sun itself. In a moment, one man watches his creation come to life and whispers words from an ancient Hindu text. "Now I am become death, destroyer of worlds." But here's what's terrifying. The man who spoke those words wasn't some mad scientist or military general. He was a soft-spoken professor who quoted Sanskrit poetry, read French literature, and believed he was saving civilization. His name was J. Robert Oppenheimer, also known as the father of the atomic bomb, and he had just unleashed the most destructive force humanity had ever created. J. Robert Oppenheimer was the last person you'd expect to create a weapon of mass destruction. Born in 1904 to a wealthy New York family, he was a Renaissance man in every sense. Fluent in multiple languages, fascinated by poetry, and obsessed with Hindu philosophy. At Harvard, he studied chemistry but spent just as much time reading literature. His friends called him Oppie, and he seemed destined for a quiet life in academia. But then the world started burning. By the 1930s, fascism was rising across Europe. Hitler's Germany was expanding its borders, and whispers began circulating in the scientific community about something terrifying. The Germans might be working on an atomic bomb. For Jewish American scientists like Oppenheimer, this wasn't just an academic concern. It was an existential threat. When World War II erupted, everything changed. In 1939, Albert Einstein himself wrote a letter to President Roosevelt, warning that Germany could develop extremely powerful bombs of a new type. The Manhattan Project was born from that fear, and in 1942, one of the most unlikely candidates was chosen to lead it. General Leslie Groves had a choice to make. He needed someone to run the secret weapons laboratory that would design the bomb. The obvious choices were Nobel Prize winners with impressive credentials and administrative experience. But Groves chose the man nobody expected, a thin, chain-smoking theoretical physicist who had never managed anything larger than a university department. Why? Because Oppenheimer had something the others didn't, an almost supernatural ability to see the bigger picture and bring brilliant minds together. Los Alamos, New Mexico, 1943. In the middle of nowhere, the most extraordinary scientific collaboration in history was taking shape. Oppenheimer had convinced the world's greatest minds to abandon their comfortable university positions and move to a secret government facility in the desert. These weren't just any scientists, these were Nobel Prize winners, future legends, the intellectual elite of the world. And somehow, this soft-spoken professor got them all working toward one impossible goal: building a bomb that could end the war. But the challenge was staggering. They were trying to split atoms to release energy equivalent to thousands of tons of TNT, using physics that barely existed 5 years earlier. No one had ever done anything like this before. They were literally inventing nuclear science as they went. The pressure was immense. Every day they delayed meant more Allied soldiers dying in the Pacific. Every failed experiment brought them closer to the possibility that Germany might finish their bomb first. Oppenheimer carried this weight on his shoulders, often working 16-hour days and losing dangerous amounts of weight from stress and poor eating habits. Then came the breakthrough. In 1944, they discovered that their original design wouldn't work with plutonium. They had to completely redesign the bomb using an implosion method, essentially crushing a ball of plutonium with perfectly timed explosions from all sides. It was like trying to squeeze a golf ball perfectly round using 32 different hammers hitting at exactly the same microsecond. But somehow, they made it work. By July 1945, after 3 years of round-the-clock scientific innovation, they were ready for the ultimate test. July 16, 1945. The Alamogordo Desert stretched endlessly under a starless sky. At 5:30 a.m., hundreds of scientists, military officials, and technicians watched from bunkers and observation points miles away as history's first atomic bomb was detonated. The explosion was beyond anything human beings had ever witnessed. For a split second, the desert became brighter than the surface of the sun. The flash was visible from 200 miles away. The sound traveled for 100 miles. A mushroom cloud rose 7.5 miles into the sky, punching a hole through the clouds themselves. Oppenheimer watched from an observation bunker 20 miles away. Those who were there said his face went through a range of emotions: relief, awe, and then something that looked like horror. But the real test was yet to come. 3 weeks later, his creation was dropped on Hiroshima. 140,000 people died instantly or within months. 3 days after that, Nagasaki was destroyed. Japan surrendered, and World War II was over. Oppenheimer had achieved what he set out to do. He had ended the war and saved countless Allied lives that would have been lost in an invasion of Japan. But something inside him had fundamentally changed. The weapon he created was far more powerful than even he had imagined, and now the world would never be the same. After the bombings, Oppenheimer became one of the most famous men in the world. He appeared on magazine covers, gave speeches to packed auditoriums, and was hailed as the father of the atomic bomb. But behind the public acclaim, he was struggling with something far more complex. In October 1945, just months after the bombs fell, Oppenheimer had a meeting with President Truman. In that meeting, he told the president something that would haunt him. "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands." Truman's response was swift and brutal. "The blood is on my hands. Let me worry about that." After Oppenheimer left, Truman reportedly told his aide, "I don't want to see that son of a bitch in this office ever again." But Oppenheimer couldn't let it go. He began advocating for international control of nuclear weapons, warning that the atomic bomb was just the beginning. He predicted that even more powerful hydrogen bombs would follow, and that an arms race would threaten the very survival of civilization. This is where his story takes a dark turn. The man who had been America's hero during the war was about to become its enemy during the peace. The 1950s brought the Cold War and McCarthyism to America. Suddenly, Oppenheimer's past associates became a liability. In the 1930s, before the war, he had been involved with Communist Front organizations. His wife had been a communist, his brother was a communist, his girlfriend had been a communist. During the war, these associations had been overlooked because Oppenheimer was essential to the Manhattan Project. But now, his opposition to the hydrogen bomb made him a target. In 1954, at the height of the Red Scare, Oppenheimer was put on trial by the Atomic Energy Commission. For 4 weeks, his life was dissected in excruciating detail. Former colleagues testified against him. His phone calls had been tapped. His office bugged, his mail open for over a decade. The most devastating blow came from Edward Teller, his former colleague from Los Alamos. Teller testified that while he believed Oppenheimer was loyal to America, he could no longer trust him with the nation's nuclear secrets. The scientific community never forgave Teller for this betrayal. On June 29, 1954, by a vote of 4-1, Oppenheimer's security clearance was revoked. His government career was over. The man who had led America to nuclear supremacy was now barred from nuclear secrets. But the real tragedy wasn't just his fall from grace. It was what his persecution meant for American science. The message was clear. Scientists who dissented from government policy would face consequences. The brief moment when scientists were seen as public intellectuals and policy advisors was over. Oppenheimer spent his final years as director of the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, cut off from the nuclear world he had helped create. He continued to warn about the dangers of nuclear weapons, but his voice was largely ignored by policymakers. In 1963, in a gesture of partial rehabilitation, President Kennedy announced that Oppenheimer would receive the Enrico Fermi Award, the highest honor the government could give to a scientist. Kennedy was assassinated before he could present it, so it fell to Lyndon Johnson to hand Oppenheimer the medal. While Johnson gave him the award, Oppenheimer said something that captured the complexity of his legacy. "I think it is just possible, Mr. President, that it has taken some charity and some courage for you to make this award today." He never apologized for building the bomb. He maintained until his death in 1967 that ending World War II justified the terrible cost. But he also never stopped warning about the monster he had helped unleash. But Oppenheimer's story forces us to confront an impossible question. When brilliant people are faced with existential threats, how far should they go to protect what they love? Oppenheimer believed he was saving Western civilization from fascism. He succeeded, but the weapon he created has held the entire world hostage ever since. Today, 9 countries possess nuclear weapons capable of ending human civilization. The clock is still ticking on Oppenheimer's legacy. He once said that scientists had known sin, that they had gained knowledge that perhaps humanity wasn't ready for. In creating the atomic bomb, Oppenheimer gave humanity godlike power over destruction. The question he left us with is simple but terrifying. Are we wise enough to handle it? That's the true legacy of the man who became death, destroyer of worlds. He didn't just split the atom, he split history itself into before and after. And we're still living in the after.